Of course, if you are one of those who believes that Vladimir Putin is dead and that the person you're seeing on television is a body double, then you're an idiot. The problem is there are plenty of idiots. And we've been told over the last 90 days that Putin has brain cancer, that he has stomach cancer, that he's had a stroke, that he has Alzheimer's, that he is senile, that he's grooming his rock and roll daughter to take over. All war propaganda, and only fools believe it, especially those of you who lived through the run-up to and the course of the Iraq war. It is a long and serried story, however. The growth of war propaganda hoaxes started in Britain, and we'll be enclosing a small package on that, an ongoing package. We'll be looking at false flags and false propaganda over the next few weeks. Of course, the opposite is true in Russia, and that's the problem. We who struggled to lift a huge stone and dropped it on our own feet are rapidly heading to rack and ruin. Our economies are in dire crisis. Our prices are rocketing. Our shortages multiplying. Our currencies falling. And the outlook is grim for next winter, with gas at double the price that it was last winter, and petrol and diesel virtually unaffordable for large sections of the population. But for the goods that are transported on the roads, there being virtually no freight railway facilities available, all of the extra petrol and diesel costs are going to be added to the costs already rocketing of essential foodstuffs. Never mind, the Queen's crown is back on the pint glass, just when not that many people drink out of pint glasses anymore. I'm not one of those who ever has. But when I see how the alcohol business is going, it seems to me merely totemistic for Boris Johnson to bring back the Queen's crown. I've got no problem with imperial weights and measures. They never left me. I've never thought or spoken in any other language other than pounds and stones and gallons and even furlongs, but that's another story. So Boris Johnson is flag waving. Not that the existence of flags are themselves a problem. The ones in Regent Street in the heart of London celebrating the 70th Jubilee of Her Majesty the Queen look perfectly fine for me, and no more or less than I would have expected. Staying in the same job for 70 years when you're the head of state is no mean achievement, and I hope the Queen lives longer still. But this must be the end of it. Britain deserves a referendum upon the eventual passing of Her Majesty the Queen, so that we get a chance to say whether or not we've grown up or not, whether or not we want a grown-up form of government or not. It doesn't have to be a President Macron. It can be a titular president that nobody else in the world ever hears of, who merely signs off on legislation and doesn't take to the airwaves to opine against legislation that doesn't fit the worldview of, say, Prince Charles, or harm the financial interests of the firm, the royal family. I want to have a republic in Britain, and I will fight for it. It's my democratic right to do so, and I'm demanding a referendum on the passing of the Queen, on the whole future of Britain's democracy. There are flags aplenty, of course, rampaging through the narrow alleyways of the old city of Jerusalem right at this minute. Israeli flags were unfurled inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, risking a regional conflagration, given the warnings that have emanated both from Lebanon and from Gaza, that any desecration of this holy place in Islam will lead to a military response. It's hard to believe that the Prime Minister of Israel really wanted all of this, in which case he's plainly so weak that he cannot stand up to the zealots, millions of them, who will not rest until the extirpation of every last Palestinian and every last Muslim and Christian holy place from the Holy Land. This is dicing with disaster. Once upon a time, wiser councils in the European Union and in Washington would have cautioned against this so-called flag march. But those councils are no longer wise and are in any case fixated on something and somewhere quite different. And that, of course, is the war with Ukraine. It is plainly obvious now and admitted regularly by spokespeople and officials and the smart newspapers in the United States that the war in Ukraine is a proxy war between the United States and the Russian Federation. So I'm not going to waste time on arguing that point, except to the blind and willfully ignorant. That must already be a given. Why then is Russia winning it? Big time. We were told, because we only have one side of the story in Western countries, the other side of the story having been criminalized, literally criminalized in Britain. If I were to give an interview on, say, RT, I would be open to prosecution and imprisonment for up to 7 years, perhaps next door to Julian Assange, who's also, of course, the other side of the story, who's been criminalized out of public life. But I see other forms of information. And if you don't, let me tell you that the Russian armed forces are on a remarkable, successful sweep in the eastern part of the country, such that by the end of this summer there will be 2 Ukraines. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, again, that's not what I wanted, and certainly not what I expected. But it was made inevitable by the failure of the regime in Kiev to implement the Minsk II agreements that they themselves signed, guaranteed by the governments of Germany and France, and by the order to attack the Donbass by the then fascist-led Ukrainian forces in the eastern line of control, a copy of which order has been produced in Moscow today. That makes the Russian intervention under international law, under RTP, remember that one? The right to protect, actually a legal incursion into the country. How about that then? Nobody was expecting that one. And of course, the authors of the right to protect were Bill Clinton and Tony Blair. And they used it to invade Yugoslavia, dismember it, and bomb its capital, Belgrade, for the best part of 90 days. Almost exactly the same amount of time that Russia has been fighting in the Ukraine. If this order is legitimate, and I have seen no evidence that it is not, then it means that Zelensky was about to send his hordes into a full-scale massacre of the Russian-speaking and ethnically Russian population in the Donbass. No wonder then that the intervention in the Ukraine took place. But I didn't want it. I wanted it to be avoided. Somebody asked me on television the other day if I supported the war. I told them I oppose the war. I've opposed it since it began 8 long years ago. And it's the failure of other people to oppose it 8 long years ago that has left us in the mess that we are now in. And of course, the war is only one side of the story. The economic war, which has been launched against Russia has been, if anything, an even bigger disaster for its authors, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the various satrapies throughout the European Union who have been prevailed upon to participate in an economic war in which plainly they were the losers from the first day. You may not remember now, after all, it was some 80 days ago, the exultation that the ruble was going to be crushed into rubble, into small pebbles. That's what they said. That may even be what they thought. 90 days later, the ruble is the best performing currency in the world. The Russians have sold everything that they have extracted or manufactured that might have gone to the West. They've sold it to the East and cannot actually keep up with demand, particularly for oil and gas and wheat, though there are many other vital raw materials that Russia produces and used to sell to us and which we are now desperately short of. They have gas and oil and petrol and diesel and wheat and raw materials in abundance and dirt cheap. We, on the other hand, are suffering grave shortages of all of them, and the prices are rocketing through the roof. It is, in this sunny clime, perhaps difficult to imagine what the situation in Western countries is going to be like come the winter time, which is only, of course, 4 or 5 months away. When we need our heating, when we need to drive for we cannot walk or cycle in the inclement weather, when our factories are running out of power and have to go on short time or even close down altogether, and mass unemployment already rocketing as a result of the economic destruction of the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures that were taken to address it, when they all start coming home to roost, what then for the Western governments that so foolishly went over the cliff with the lemming-like enthusiasm at the order of a man not fit to be sent out for a loaf, for increasingly he wouldn't be able to find one. It's come to something that the only two statespeople, yes, I use that word, in the United States talking any sense about how to get out of this disaster are Henry Kissinger, aged 99 and with more blood on his hands than anyone alive in the world today, and Donald J. Trump. Don't take my word for the latter. Take Noam Chomsky, the great man of letters, the great man of the left. He said, the only statesman who understands how we have to get out of this is Donald Trump, and he's right. And here's something I want to add that not many people, oddly, have begun to take account of. In every opinion poll in the United States, especially the last one, Donald Trump trounces Joe Biden in every single battleground state. If that continues, and it's hard to believe it's going to go into reverse, then the next president of the United States is going to be Donald Trump. And he's going to reset all of America's foreign and military policy objectives. And all of these lemmings that jumped off the cliff at the order of Joe Biden are going to want to climb back up that cliff because the orders from Washington will change in just 2 years from now. NATO, which has grown so fat and overblown and giddy with its newfound centrality in Western life, is going to be cut down to size. Trump's America is going to be an America first America. It's going to be an isolationist America. It's going to be America that doesn't want to go to war everywhere that the president drops his hat. Just think about that. Plainly, our own people in power in Western countries have not done so. Lastly, Tony Blair is back in the news. His son, who's in his 20s, I think, perhaps early 30s, has just bought a house for £22 million. That's $35 million or so. A man in his 20s or early 30s. How did he get so rich? How did Tony Blair get 27 houses? That's when I counted it, when I was making a film about him. Leaving aside the filthy lucre in which Mr. Blair rolls nightly like a Dorian Gray figure, and it shows, will not save him on the judgment day. Of that I'm certain. But you're about to hear much more of him. He is launching a new Macron-esque centrist political force, just in advance of being given by Her Majesty a knighthood in June in Windsor. He's even bringing Macron to speak at it. Such is his lack of confidence in the block of wood running his former political party, the Labour Party. He wants to start something new in the centre ground, as if Keir Starmer wasn't centrist enough. Keir Starmer, the man who, without qualification, supports the Israel on parade in the old city of Jerusalem this evening, and the Labour friends of apartheid that he is the emblem of. Blair doesn't trust him as a likely winner of any British general election. So President Macron is coming to England. Lock up your mothers.